So, hi everyone. I'm Zac. I'm the CEO of Aztec, and our gig is scalable privacy via a ZK rollup based layer 2 operating on Ethereum. And so I want to talk about how do we do private DeFi cheaply with Aztec, with our Aztec Connect architecture, and how can you and the community kind of integrate with this to add privacy to native DeFi protocols. So, just to set the stage a little bit here, I think we all know that the massive ETH rally has created a minor issue that no one apart from whales can afford to use Ethereum these days. And on top of that, we're starting to see that the lack of privacy is starting to have more and more repercussions. This is going to be more of a long-term developing consequence of the transparency of blockchain. But even today, you have things like trades getting front-run, identities being sniped and analyzed. And when it comes to scaling, one of the key issues that we have is that layer 2s fragment liquidity. Because the current model for interacting with the layer 2 is that you have to port your protocol to the layer 2 and effectively clone it. And that means a new liquidity pool, different prices, and it's a bit of a minefield to navigate. And this is something that we're trying to solve. So we're taking a bit of a different approach with Aztec's layer 2, where instead of trying to convince DeFi protocols to migrate to Aztec and say, how fork on Aztec, clone on Aztec, blah, 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 we want to kind of deal with Ethereum as it is and not as we want it to be, and effectively allow users to cheaply interact directly with layer 1 DeFi and not creating this situation where you're splitting liquidity. And on top of that, we also want to make sure that user identities are private when they're doing these transactions. So this is kind of a basic overview of the Aztec architecture. The idea is it's DeFi aggregation using ZK snarks, so that if you and 100 other people on the Aztec network want to perform a specific trade, like a Uniswap ETH to DAI swap, we will use zero-knowledge proofs to aggregate all of your transactions together into one meta transaction. And when our rollup block gets mined on chain, then that one transaction will be sent to Uniswap, and the returns from that will be disseminated to the individuals in the proportions that they invested, and also through the form of encrypted claims on the underlying DAI. So identities, no identities are revealed in this transaction flow to anybody at all. This is a slightly fancier graphic of how it works. The idea is inside Aztec Connect, users create zero-knowledge proofs that describe the transaction they want to do. This protects their identities. And then once we have aggregated enough of these transactions to make them cheap, we send them to the layer 1 smart contract, and then the proceeds from that get split and returned to the individual users. And this allows for significant gas savings without having the traditional compromises of having to do all of your activity inside a layer 2 and therefore kind of splitting and fragmenting liquidity. So these are just, this is our kind of estimations based off of some internal benchmarking of how much it'll cost to interact with these various DeFi protocols through our architecture. So it's a simple 1 over x function, but the idea is if you can get to a batch size of, say, 100 transactions, then the floor gas price for all of these interactions is only 10,000 gas, regardless of if the actual original transaction is over 1 million. And so one of the things we want to do is kind of unblock reward schemes, because right now I think a lot of people are in a situation where it actually costs them more gas to claim rewards they've earned in a protocol than they actually get from the reward token. So this is the summary of how it works. The idea is the values being transacted on chain, they have to be public because we're dealing with a public layer 1. We're dealing with the architectures as they exist, but the key thing is that the identities are hidden. And this is what gives privacy. Because sure, if you know that 100 ETH is going into Aave, but you don't know who's actually contributing to the 100 ETH, then as long as you have a relatively large anonymity set of ETH inside Aztec, this will provide extremely high quality privacy. And yeah, effectively, the gas costs get socialized, amortized across all users. And so how does this actually work in practice? Well, it's a permissionless architecture. So we model layer 1 smart contracts as asynchronous token swaps. The idea is that you put tokens in, and at some later time, you get tokens out. The exchange rates don't have to be known ahead of time. They don't. And you can have multiple output asset types. You can also have multiple input asset types. This interface is slightly out of date. We'll be publishing our full docs imminently. And we're confident that you can model pretty much any layer 1 smart contracts using this flow, or more complicated flows can be simulated using synthetic tokens. And one of the really valuable things about this is that it allows protocols to chain multiple transaction flows together. So I don't know how many people here are smart contract developers or protocol developers? Yeah, like quite a few. And so I don't know if you share this problem, but when it comes to optimizing gas costs and making your transactions to your protocol cheap, the thought crosses my mind of, wow, it would be really useful if I could control users' contract wallets. As in, if I want them to do 3 independent transactions, I can sequence that without them having to do 3 independent Ethereum calls. And that's kind of what you can do with Aztec Connect, because everybody interacting with your protocol through Aztec is interacting through a singular bridge contract, which anybody can write. You can write, your community can write. And so effectively, everybody's going through the same layer 1 kind of pseudo wallet. So if you have a complicated flow, like you want to deposit into Curve and then withdraw something from it and then put that into Element Finance, you can do that all in a single transaction and then get all the costs amortized down by the aggregation techniques that we're using. So just an example of like a need to die trade. In the first roll-up block, users will be creating these zero-knowledge proofs, which basically they will be destroying ETH that they own inside Aztec, and will be creating a claim on the output of the DeFi interaction that is yet to occur. What will then happen is that the Aztec rollup contract via an untrusted validator will aggregate all of these claim proofs together. And then when that rollup block hits mainnet, the only information that's revealed is the total amount that's being sent to the bridge contract and the bridge contract in question. So the identities are all gone by that point. Not even the rollup provider, the third party, knows who the identities are. And then once the interaction result is created, so the swap happens, the results get returned back into Aztec, and in the next rollup block, then any untrusted validator node, rollup node, can compute the proof, which will exchange that claim note into the outputs DAI note in the correct ratio, depending on how much was deposited and how much DAI was exchanged from the trade. It's completely untrusted. They have a profit motive to do this because they'll get paid for creating that proof. At no point, our user identity is revealed. It's completely private. As I said before, it's a permissionless architecture, so anybody can build these bridge contracts, anybody can submit transactions to rollup sequences. We're launching, ideally in December, with a ring of validators. We sometimes call them rollup providers, but our imminent plans are to also decentralize and open that up to the community. And we also have an open source SDK so that anybody can build front ends, build dApps that talk to Aztec Connect. And these are some examples of some of the launch interactions that we're going to be supporting. And so I've talked a lot about how this tech allows layer 1 transactions to be cheap, but what really we care about at Aztec is going a little bit beyond the status quo. Not just chasing the current functionality of Ethereum, but scalable, but trying to add to it. And so we believe that adding cheap privacy adds a lot of new kinds of interactions with Ethereum that don't exist at the moment. Things like genuinely blind auctions. So when you're creating a bid, you don't know what other people are bidding or who is bidding. So you can get genuinely fair price setting mechanisms. Additionally, you can do private anonymous voting so that you can have DAOs or protocols where for contentious controversial votes, people's votes are genuinely free, they're not influenced by peer pressure or community pressure. You could do things like time-weighted trading. So, if you want to buy a large position slowly over time, then people using chain analytics can't see what you're up to, and then, front-run your trades will snipe you as easily. And also things like private subscription services. So you can subscribe to, a journal publication, an e-zine, and pay them regularly over time without anybody know it except the service you're subscribing to knowing that you are the ones who are paying them. And yeah, and obviously the lack of chain analytics means you can finally actually have private trading strategies on layer 1 without chain analytics exposing everything you're doing. So this is our roadmap. For like, how are we going to get there? We're pretty close already. We're planning on launching in December. In March this year, we launched as the first version of Aztec and ZK Money, which allows users to shield and unshield cryptocurrencies on-chain. And now we're enhancing that functionality by enabling aggregated DeFi interactions, layer 1 interactions. And the end goal of our technology, of the ZK rollup tech, is to enable fully programmable privacy on mainnet, which would enable a lot of the decentralized identity ideas that the previous guys were talking about here. Being able to conditionally reveal something about yourself to one other person on-chain without anybody else knowing about it. Or even to reveal something about yourself to a decentralized protocol. They're not sharing that information with anyone. So for example, proving that you're on a whitelist would be like a basic example. So anyway, that's the talk. Happy to answer any questions. We've got a bit of time left for that. Also, my co-founder Joe is at the back with Aztec swag. If anybody wants some t-shirts, wants some hoodies. So yeah, thanks for listening. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. Cheers.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we'll take one question.
Hi, you mentioned multiple rollup providers. How can someone become a rollup provider in us?
So was that, how can someone become a rollup provider? So in the short term, we're going to be launching with just a small ring of rollup providers. They're going to be kind of semi-trusted. So the main goal of it is to now ensure that technical faults and errors don't bring the network down. But the longer term plans are to provide a user staking mechanism effectively, and then taking advantage of Ethereum's consensus to sequence rollup providers. And so effectively, it'll just be like running a node and staking some capital against your ability to provide services, and you'll get slashed if you're allocated a block and you don't perform your job and provide a rollup.